Good evening, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. President Trump receives NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in the White House. Trump says the US will send Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. World leaders react as US is set to impose 30% tariffs on all imports from the EU and Mexico. On Monday at the White House, President Trump met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte for strategic talks focused on security, defence cooperation and the ongoing war in Ukraine.
The meeting at the White House underscored NATO's broadening agenda as leaders addressed several pressing regional and global issues. President Trump referenced recent diplomatic progress in the South Caucasus, expressing confidence in efforts to resolve long-standing tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
And we solved the other one, that we just seem to have, Armenia and Azerbaijan. It looks like that's going to come to a conclusion, successful conclusion.
President Trump then turned to Russia, voicing strong dissatisfaction with the ongoing war in Ukraine. He warned that unless Moscow shifts its stance, Washington would impose heavy secondary tariffs, a move designed to pressure not just Russia, but its trade partners as well.
One of the reasons that you're here today is to hear that we are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. But we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
The talks also reaffirmed NATO's long-term backing for Ukraine. Secretary General Rutte praised a new wave of European-led military contributions, highlighting close coordination among allies to strengthen Ukraine's defense capacity.
You called me on Thursday that you had taken a decision. And the decision is that you want Ukraine what it needs to have to maintain, to be able to defend itself against Russia, but you do want Europeans to pay for it, which is totally logical. And this is building on the tremendous success of the NATO summit, the 5%, but also the decision to keep Ukraine strong and the decision to increase our defense industrial production. So based on that, that was Europe stepping up. This is again Europeans stepping up. So I've been in contact with many countries. I can tell you that at this moment, Germany massively, but also Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, they all want to be part of this. And this is only the first wave. There will be more.
The NATO Secretary General noted that Ukraine is set to receive a significant boost in military supplies, including missiles, air defense systems and ammunition. Support aimed at increasing pressure on Moscow and prompting a shift toward renewed peace efforts.
Now, the US is stepping up support for Ukraine with new long-range weapons as NATO's chief visits Washington. Ubi Shabandar reports from Washington, D.C.
A major shift in the Trump administration's Ukraine policy on Monday as Washington ramps up weapons shipments to Ukraine to include offensive long-range missiles capable of striking deep into Russian territory and even into Moscow. This will be the first time that the Trump administration authorizes new weapons to Kyiv, to include Patriot air defense batteries meant to shoot down Russian Shahed kamikaze drones and ballistic missiles that have been raining down on Ukrainian cities in record numbers. This major policy shift comes as NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte visits Washington, meeting with President Trump. NATO member states will be purchasing the new U.S. weapons and then transferring them to Ukraine. Selling the weapons to NATO allies makes the move more aligned with President Trump's America First policy agenda. Previously, most weapons sent to Ukraine came directly from existing U.S. weapons stockpiles. The genesis for President Trump's policy decision came about following his meeting in late June with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a NATO summit. That meeting reset the personal relations between the two leaders. And reports here in Washington indicate that President Trump then made up his mind to authorize additional weapon shipments following a July 3rd phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. It was a call that left a lasting impression on President Trump, who has become increasingly convinced that Putin is not serious about peace negotiations. Axios reported that the Russian leader made it clear that he will pursue an aggressive military campaign this summer in an attempt to capture more Ukrainian territory. That has angered President Trump, apparently, and the president has been very public with his frustration towards Putin's refusal to halt the war. And his announcement is a reflection that President Trump believes that added military pressure will be required to convince the Kremlin to shift its own policy. In the meantime, Zelensky met President Trump's special envoy, General Keith Kellogg, to discuss boosting Ukraine's air defense, joint arms production, and defense procurement with European allies. Western intelligence estimate that Russian armed forces have likely suffered about 236,000 casualties, that's killed and wounded, so far in 2025, as Russian attacks across multiple front lines have continued at a high level, with steady advances made by the Russians in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. President Trump has also said that he is giving Russia 50 days to make a deal or else face 100%, quote, secondary tariffs, referring to a plan to impose tariffs on countries like China and India, who are major buyers of Russian oil. That could also have a major impact on global oil markets and significantly impact Russia's own economy, which is largely dependent on oil and gas exports. Ube Shabander for A News, Washington, D.C.
Well, joining us now to discuss this further is political scientist Philippe Fernandes. Thank you for being with us. Now, Philippe, what are your key takeaways from this meeting?
Hello, Katie. Thank you very much for this invitation. So, Donald Trump basically tried to use once again tariffs as a cohesive means to gain leverage within the negotiation table. He's been doing it with quite a few different countries, and Russia specifically, given that Trump was elected also on the basis, when it comes to foreign affairs, that he would be able to end the Russia-Ukraine war and conflict. And then it's noticeable and undeniable the shift in Trump's tone towards Vladimir Putin and Russia. He publicly rebuked Putin. He called his conciliatory tone something that was not credible, that was not desirable to have at the negotiation table. And so his approach toward Putin is becoming more hardened. And so he's basically replacing the idea that he needed to have the diplomatic channels open. And that's why, especially when it came into office, he would refuse to call Putin a murderer and refuse to put all the blame in Russia, to have this leverage. But he's now abandoning this earlier conciliation tone and trying to apply more pressure to gain more leverage, basically on tariffs towards Russia and with military aid promises towards Ukraine. Now, we know that there is a lot of credibility issue going on. So a lot of people did not expect Donald Trump to be so focused in foreign affairs, would not expect Trump to present himself as a peacemaker. And so Trump is now trying to get a deal done with Vladimir Putin and Russia. It has been for a while that it seems like that Ukraine was maybe in the way, quote unquote, to get a deal with Donald Trump. But now Trump is posing this ultimatum towards Russia, trying to boost his own public image as a deal maker. And so he has changing his posture towards Ukraine and using more aggressively the tone with economic threats via tariffs on Russia, and promising military backup or military backing, better said, for Ukraine.
Now you're touching upon that military aid package. It's been said that Ukraine isn't going to get those Patriot missiles very quickly. How fast is Ukraine actually going to receive this military aid?
Now that's going to depend also on what sort of deal is the U.S. trying to pursue with NATO. We know that the U.S. is trying to sell more military equipment to NATO. We know that at least the last update I have seen, 8 member states of NATO have backed that NATO would in fact be able to buy this military equipment from the US, and we still have to see what sort of military equipment will be involved, all in all, and it will all depend on how does NATO get this support from this military equipment, and what sort of deal can NATO as a whole organization do with Ukraine afterwards. So it may depend on this indirect link through NATO, how fast or how slow will the Ukrainians get those Patriot missiles.
So as you say, according to Trump, NATO is going to be footing the bill for these weapons. How is that going to be arranged?
So that's going to depend, then again, on diplomatic measures through NATO member states. We know that there is quite a lot of unity when it comes within NATO member states. I mean, of course, when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we know it as well that some member states have been posing some problems within the structure, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to get this sort of military equipment, or to at least limit the military equipment that Ukrainians have to assure that it is a defensive equipment, and not being able to escalate this war any further by having offensive equipment, basically meaning not having the missiles that President Volodymyr Zelensky is requesting, missiles that are able to get into Russia territory and to attack Russia cities, Russia infrastructures. So it will depend on what sort of deal and arrangement is done within the ministries of foreign affairs from these NATO member states, and then again at the highest level with the chief of governments.
Thank you very much for your insights and for joining us on the programme. President Trump says he's hopeful a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas could be reached soon. Washington is backing a 60-day ceasefire plan that includes the gradual release of hostages, a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, and broader negotiations to end the war. Trump told reporters that efforts are ongoing and a breakthrough may happen in the coming days. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he would only support a US-Iran nuclear deal if Iran makes 3 major concessions, including halting uranium enrichment, limiting missile range, and ending support for regional proxies. Our correspondent Blake Sifton has more.
In an interview filmed while he was in the U.S. last week and broadcast on Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he would only support a U.S.-Iranian deal to limit Iran's nuclear program if Iran were to make 3 major concessions. The first concession he demanded is that Iran no longer be able to enrich any uranium at all. That goes much further than limits on Iran's ability to highly enrich uranium near the grade capable of being used to make a bomb. The other concession he demanded was that Iran no longer be able to possess or build ballistic missiles with a range greater than 480 kilometers. That would mean that the ballistic missiles Iran would be allowed to possess would have a far shorter range than those that can reach Israel. The final concession he demanded was that Iran cease all support for its regional proxies. These are the groups that have fought and attacked Israel throughout this war. They include Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the militias in Iraq. The Iranian foreign minister had previously said that Iran would return to the negotiating table with the U.S. to negotiate a nuclear deal if it received guarantees that the air attacks carried out by Israel and the United States against its nuclear program would not be repeated in the future. In commenting on Benjamin Netanyahu's statements, He accused the Prime Minister of dictating how the U.S. would carry out its negotiations with Iran, and said that it is a farce that Iran will accept anything a wanted war criminal has to say. What concessions the United States may want from Iran in an eventual deal is unclear. However, what does look unlikely is that Iran will accept these major concessions that Netanyahu has demanded. Blake Sifton for A News in Tel Aviv.
Well, tensions over Iran's nuclear program have resurfaced, with Tehran saying recent events disrupted planned talks with the US. It's now seeking assurances before any negotiations resume. Our Iran correspondent Taraz Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
Foreign Minister Araghchi, in a message on his X account, said Premier Netanyahu is openly dictating what the US should or should not say or do in discussions with Iran, and is trying to undermine Iran's peaceful nuclear program and its ballistic missile capability. His remarks were made in response to a statement by Netanyahu in which he reportedly said that Iran must limit the range of its missiles, ballistic missiles, to 480 kilometers. Last week, in an article in Financial Times, Araghchi wrote that Israel's 12-day military aggression on Iran, which was waged on 13th June, sabotaged diplomacy. Iranian and US negotiators were scheduled to meet on 15th June in Oman for mediated talks, during which Tehran's alternative proposal to US on nuclear enrichment was going to be discussed. However, a week later, US President Donald Trump's administration became a party to the war when it bombed 3 major Iranian nuclear sites on 22nd June. 3 weeks into the 12th June ceasefire between Iran on one side and the US and Israel on the other, which is still holding, Tehran says it has been receiving messages from US for renewed talks, but it is demanding guarantees that there would be no military action again in the middle of negotiations. Taraz Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
Tensions are intensifying once again between the US and key trading partners. At the weekend, President Trump threatened to impose a 30% tariff on imports from Mexico and the European Union, starting on the 1st of August. This has sparked strong political pushback and rattled financial markets across the globe.
US President Donald Trump has defended his administration's latest tariff hikes, which have sparked global concern and sharp criticism. On Saturday, Trump announced 30% tariffs on imports from the European Union and Mexico, effective from the 1st of August. He later claimed that tariff revenue had already reached record levels. Trump argued the US has long faced unfair trade practices, singling out the EU and Japan.
Our country made $25 billion last month, $25 billion. It hasn't done that in a long time, and a lot of that's done because of good management, and number one, and maybe even more importantly, the tariffs that are pouring in. We have tariffs pouring in at levels that we have never seen before, and they've only just started. That's really a small portion.
The move has sparked immediate backlash. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the tariffs will hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. While the EU has paused countermeasures until early August, leaders warned they're preparing a strong response.
The United States have sent us a letter with measures that would come into effect unless there is a negotiated solution. So we will therefore also extend the suspension of our countermeasures till early August. And at the same time, we will continue to prepare further countermeasures so we are fully prepared.
France's Emmanuel Macron urged Brussels to act decisively, and Sweden's Prime Minister called the move a unilateral escalation. Germany's Vice-Chancellor Lars Klingbeil warned that Trump's actions threaten both the American and European economies. Meanwhile, Spain and others have reiterated their support for EU-led negotiations. On the other side of the Atlantic, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum called the move unfair, saying Mexico's sovereignty is non-negotiable. The country's ministries vowed to defend national interests, but emphasized ongoing negotiations. Trump has also threatened Canada with a 35% tariff, linking it to alleged fentanyl trafficking and trade imbalances. Markets reacted with volatility. Investors have become largely accustomed to Trump's policy methods, and stocks eased only moderately, while the dollar gained little on the euro.
Well, the countdown to a major trade clash is on. President Trump's threats to slap a 30% tariff on key European exports, from cheese and wine to steel and cars, is causing Brussels to create a retaliation list, warning that if the US hits hard, the EU will hit back.
From French vineyards to Italian cheese factories. From Spanish ham producers to German grain farms. Europe's food and agricultural industries are bracing for impact. President Donald Trump's new 30% tariff threatens to choke off a major export pipeline to the US, according to experts. These aren't just luxury items, they're multi-billion euro industries. A sudden drop in US demand could mean overstocked warehouses, halted orders, and production lines running slow, say analysts. In response, a wide range of American goods could soon face new European Union tariffs as well, such as meat and vegetables to textiles and machinery. Brussels says its list is ready to target billions of euros in US exports if Washington goes ahead with its 30% tariff on EU products. Last year, the EU exported more than 40 billion euros worth of cars to the US. French wines, Italian spirits, German cheese, and European steel are all part of a trade relationship valued at 1.7 trillion euros annually. Now, those sectors could be hit hard. As the clock ticks down to the 1st of August, industries across the EU are watching nervously and preparing for what could be the biggest transatlantic trade clash in years. The European Commission says it's still hoping for a breakthrough, but with less than 3 weeks to go, businesses are being told to prepare for disruption. The stakes are high, and industries on both sides, including automotive, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals, are bracing for impact.
Time now to hear from our correspondent Anita Sharma with the latest updates on the key developments shaping Europe.
Tensions between Washington and Brussels hit new heights. Over the weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to impose 30% tariffs on virtually all EU imports, including iconic French wine, German cars, and Italian cheese. The tariffs would begin August 1st. Trump accuses the bloc of persistent trade imbalances and national security concerns in U.S.-EU economic ties. Across the EU, leaders are responding with a mix of diplomacy and resolve. It seems the EU is straining to maintain unity. French President Emmanuel Macron condemned the tariffs as unjustified and warned they threaten decades of transatlantic partnership. Macron pledged firm countermeasures if the U.S. proceeds and no deal is reached by August 1st. As for Germany, which relies more on exports to the U.S. than France, Chancellor Merz called for serious solution-oriented negotiations, emphasizing that dialogue and diplomacy must come before escalation. While the EU aims for negotiations with the U.S., it has prepared 2 retaliatory packages that could hit a combined 93 billion euros worth of U.S. goods, but they are held in reserve for now. So what's next? EU leaders are continuing negotiations with the U.S. If no compromise is found, expect a coordinated EU tariff response, a defining test for the bloc's unity and its longtime economic ties with America. Stock markets are dipping slightly on this news. Meantime, Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, is on board with delaying the tariffs. However, she faces a crisis of her own. Last week, she survived a rare no-confidence vote over a perceived lack of transparency with respect to text messages she sent to the head of Pfizer during negotiations to secure COVID-19 vaccines. The motion, introduced by far-right members of European Parliament, fell short, with 175 in favor, 360 against, and 18 abstentions out of 553 votes cast. While she survived, analysts say it's most certainly a wake-up call. Votes of no confidence are extremely rare. This was the first one since 2014 and garnered significant support across party lines, signaling deeper distrust. Among her own backers, many abstained or stayed away. Liberal, Renew, and Socialist S&D MEPs threatened to withhold support over concerns like budget priorities, the Green Deal, centralization, and transparency. Now, to secure votes, von der Leyen had to make some concessions, notably pledging to retain the European Social Fund and reorient budget priorities, all at the expense of some competitiveness and defense spending initiatives totaling roughly 150 billion euros. Vice President Katarina Barley warned this is von der Leyen's absolute last chance, suggesting future motions could follow. But some view the event as a consolidation of her authority. Her party, the EPP, united, with many saying that lets her pull all the political strings in Brussels. So what lies ahead? Well, the EU budget negotiations, 2028 to 2034. Von der Leyen must now juggle priorities from cohesion and social spending to defense, as well as tech, the environment, and support for Ukraine. She'll need firm agreements with Socialists, Greens, and Renew to prevent future challenges. And the Commission will have to show it can advance its climate and social agenda while navigating economic competitiveness and geopolitical demands, especially as right-wing factions continue to gain influence. After the summer break, another confidence motion from the far right is anticipated, and any missteps could provoke a real political crisis. In summary, EU leaders face twin tests: managing an escalating trade spat with the U.S., where unity and negotiation must outweigh brinkmanship, and reinforcing internal political cohesion as von der Leyen navigates a divided parliament and prepares for tough budget choices ahead. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Lyon, France. Now, back to Baku.
Thanks, Anita. Now, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has survived a political challenge, retaining her position after a no-confidence vote in the European Parliament. But while she keeps her job, her grip on power is now under fresh scrutiny.
Vote is closed and it is rejected.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen survived a no-confidence motion in Strasbourg on the 10th of July, the first such vote against a Commission chief in more than a decade. The motion needed a two-thirds majority to pass. In the end, 360 MEPs voted against ousting her, 175 voted in favour and 18 abstained. But with 167 lawmakers not showing up, the unusually low turnout has raised questions about her leadership and internal dissent. The charge was led by Romanian MEP Gheorghe Piperea, a prominent figure from the nationalist AUR party. He accused von der Leyen of evading transparency during the EU's COVID vaccine negotiations, pointing to undisclosed text messages with Pfizer's CEO, now at the centre of the so-called Pfizer-Gate scandal. Piperea also accused her of election meddling in Romania and Germany and of centralising too much power in Brussels at the expense of member states. While acknowledging the motion was unlikely to succeed, he called von der Leyen's survival sad and claimed the no-confidence vote had opened a Pandora's box of dissent that could trigger more challenges in the months ahead. Von der Leyen leaned on her centrist allies, the EPP, Socialists, Renew Europe and the Greens, to hold the line. But that support came with caveats. The Socialists only backed her after she pledged to protect the EU's social fund in the next budget. Others voiced frustration over her recent overtures to Giorgia Meloni's far-right bloc. Parliament Vice President Katarina Barley warned that for many on the centre-left, this was von der Leyen's last chance. As budget negotiations heat up and with trade tensions rising under US President Donald Trump, von der Leyen faces an uphill battle to maintain her fragile coalition. The vote may have kept her in office, but it's left her more politically exposed than ever. This was the 10th no-confidence vote in the EU's history. And while Ursula von der Leyen survives for now, the dissent brewing inside the European Parliament suggests this might just be the beginning of a much tougher term ahead. The fallout from Pfizergate and internal power struggles are expected to resurface in upcoming debates over the EU's long-term budget and its leadership in a rapidly shifting global order.
A high-level trilateral meeting has kicked off in Brussels between Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The meeting focused on EU-Armenia ties and peace in the South Caucasus. Von der Leyen called the draft treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan a seismic moment. She expressed hope that the agreement, which could end decades of hostility, will be signed soon. Now, President Trump, during an Oval Office meeting with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, briefly addressed the ongoing Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process, suggesting that the parties are nearing a successful outcome. This follows an earlier report by Middle East Eye in which it was stated that US Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack confirmed the existence of a proposal whereby the overland passage connecting mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan enclave via Armenia would be managed by an American commercial operator. Yerevan has reaffirmed that it opposes transferring control of the route to any third party. Joining us now is Ambassador Matthew Breezer, former US diplomat. Thank you for being with us. Now, how do you evaluate President Trump's remarks made during his Oval Office meeting with Mark Rutte?
So, to be honest, if you look at the video clip of President Trump, you'll see he's reading from a card and kind of struggling with the names a bit. And, you know, he's not the one driving this process. I think there are experienced people inside the administration who realize that there is an opportunity here to solidify the prospects for a peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia by having someone other than Russia and the FSB, so the former KGB, be in control of the corridor that you just mentioned between the main part of Azerbaijan across Armenia to Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan, and to Turkey. And I think it's a creative proposal to have a U.S. logistics company be the entity that maintains the operations of such a corridor. But we don't know yet whether Armenia and Azerbaijan agree to it. Clearly, Russia will oppose it. And I think President Trump, at this point, doesn't fully understand it.
So what do you make of the viability and the geopolitical implications of this proposal?
I think the geopolitical implications could be enormous. If the United States, under President Trump, is willing to re-enter mediation of the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, by the way, which I spent a huge part of my diplomatic career on, and does it via an American company, because that is President Trump's preferred way to do diplomacy, as we see, for example, in the case of Ukraine with the critical minerals deal. I think that if it succeeded, it would be fantastic. I think both Azerbaijan and Armenia trust Washington, but I also worry that Russia will be furious if a U.S. company takes over the role that President Putin tried to create for the Russian security services, the FSB, in the November 10, 2020 ceasefire statement that ended the military phase of the Second Karabakh War. And I think there would be a lot of potential security risks in that situation if that U.S. company came in to operate the corridor. And I don't think that company would be able to maintain the security of the corridor. So there's more negotiating that has to happen, more creativity, more diplomatic thinking among Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the United States that's necessary.
Really great to have your insights. Thank you for joining us on the programme.
Thank you.
Now, for more on this, we are joined by Sultan Zahidov, leading advisor at the Air Centre in Baku. Thank you for being with us. Now, what do you make of the comment made by President Trump and the proposal revealed by Ambassador Tom Barrack?
Well, that's an interesting development right after the Abu Dhabi meeting, that Tom Barrack says that the United States logistic company can take over the Zengezur corridor on a 100-year lease. I believe the opening of Zengezur corridor, along other issues such as peace treaty and the limitation of borders, have been discussed at Abu Dhabi meeting, but we don't know yet the position of Armenia with respect to that, although we observe certain, let's say, positive signals from Armenia. But what's important to know here is that this, the opening of the Zangezur corridor is not something which interests only Azerbaijan. As we all know, this is a link where Armenia, between Azerbaijan and its exclave Nakhchivan. Zangezur corridor carries a certain geopolitical and geo-economic, let's say, weight, as it is a vital, it can serve as a vital artery, not just linking Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, but also linking Turkey to Central Asia, and linking European Union to China. It can tremendously boost the trade volume between the east and west of Eurasia. And therefore, there are major stakeholders such as China, European Union, and so on. And I believe their follow-up meetings, which was agreed at Abu Dhabi meeting, will bring more clarity to the prospects of Zangezur corridor and make us understand the details of this project.
Thank you very much for your insights and for joining us on the programme.
Pleasure for me.
Now, previously in our Inside Politics talk show, Anastasia Lavrina discussed the recent Trump statement about Azerbaijan-Armenia with Professor Brenda Schaefer from the US Naval Postgraduate School.
You know, Trump says a lot of things, and even about a month ago when the Secretary of State Rubio was listing the foreign policy accomplishments of the new administration, you know, they listed Armenia, Azerbaijan, that peace. Sure, the United States and the Trump administration has been supporting this peace. By the Trump administration joining the attacks on Iran, they've weakened Iran, and therefore Iran can't undermine the peace like in the past. But as Hikmetogiev said, I believe over the weekend, essentially there is peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the two sides are just going to decide on their own how to formalize it. I believe the U.S. has an interest that an American company, would run or operate the Zangezur corridor. This could help depoliticize it. I think we need to be very cautious. I mean, we're seeing, what happens now. Private companies, when they were in Iraq and Afghanistan, now in the Gaza Strip, it doesn't always go. It doesn't always depoliticize, and sometimes it creates a lot of challenges as well. I think also we need to make sure that Russia is comfortable with the Zangezur corridor, because we don't want Russia, the U.S. to sort of push Russia away from this project or from the region, because Russia will, return and try to undermine stability. So it's probably better to have something which isn't a pure American project, but something that there's an interest of both Russia and Iran in its stable operation.
Georgia's foreign trade turnover saw a notable rise in the first 6 months of the year. Preliminary figures from the country's statistics office show that both exports and imports are on the rise, but the trade deficit remains significant. According to the National Statistical Committee, Georgia's foreign trade turnover reached almost $12 billion from January to June, up 12.7% year on year. Exports rose by nearly 14%, totaling just over $3.2 billion, while imports climbed to almost $8.7 billion. Despite the growth, the trade deficit stood at $5.5 billion. In Kabul, major strides are being made towards boosting Afghanistan's energy sector. The leadership of Dar Afghanistan Breshna Sherkat has met with investors from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to explore new opportunities for power generation in the country.
The CEO of the Afghanistan Breshna Sherkat, Dr. Abdulbari Umar, welcomed energy investors from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan at the company's headquarters in Kabul, where discussions focused on expanding investment in Afghanistan's power generation sector. Dr. Umar briefed the delegation on the vast opportunities available for energy production, highlighting the government's readiness to support both national and international partners. He emphasized that electricity production remains a top priority for state-owned company. noting that the organization has previously worked with foreign investors under similar frameworks. The visiting investors laid out their proposals for initiating both large and small-scale power projects. They also presented plans to support Afghanistan's engineering sector by offering technical training programs for local talent. This meeting signals a growing international interest in Afghanistan's energy infrastructure, which remains one of the country's most critical needs. With promises of cooperation and mutual benefits, the talks mark a hopeful step toward expanding electricity access in Afghanistan. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for A News.
Syria has signed its first major international deal since US sanctions were lifted at the end of June. The $800 million agreement with Dubai Ports World aims to modernise the Tartus port on the Mediterranean. President Ahmed al-Shara, who leads Syria's transitional government, was present at the signing ceremony. This move marks a significant shift in the country's economic direction following the end of Bashar al-Assad's rule. Another wildfire has broken out in Turkey's Izmir just days after a series of blazes swept through the region. So far this summer, hundreds of fires have erupted in the country, forcing nearly 50,000 people to evacuate their homes.
Helicopters dropped water to try to extinguish the latest forest wildfire in Turkey in the western province of Izmir on Sunday. In the district of Urla, firefighting teams battled to contain the blaze amid thick smoke and rising flames. 4 planes, 13 helicopters and 34 fire trucks were deployed according to the local forestry authority. Meanwhile, further north of the country, authorities say they've managed to contain a forest fire on the Yalova-Bursa border, which broke out near a village in Yalova's central district and a nearby neighborhood in Bursa. Helicopters, water trucks, a first response vehicle and personnel were deployed. Officials also reported that around 3 hectares of forest were damaged before the flames were brought under control through coordinated air and ground efforts. The latest fires come amid one of the most intense wildfire seasons Turkey has faced in recent years. In Izmir, 2 people were killed in fires earlier this month. Hundreds of blazes have scorched large areas of forest across the country this summer, forcing around 50,000 people to evacuate from their homes.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful evening.